muscle that you need to build by the time you get to 1 million and beyond is going to be how you troubleshoot and solve complex problems. Not the I want 10 tips and tricks for how to run marketing campaigns, not the highly tactical stuff. I'm talking about the juicy, meaty, hard challenges and problems. How do you fix bad pricing? How do you fix bad activation? How do you fix poor customer acquisition? And not in the tactical sense, but in the strategic sense. What's your approach? What data do you use? What's the playbook that you run every time you come across a hairy, sticky problem? Because the answer for a lot of people is to bury their head in the sand, wait until it becomes so bad that they have to do something, or worse, their business dies. And I think if you can build the muscle of how you solve sticky, hard problems and how you learn how others do it, I think you're going to do infinitely better than people who never think about that type of thing.
Presented by Zapier, the AI automation company.
Hello and welcome to the Small Team, Big Scale podcast. The show where we talk about how tiny teams with big ambitions are doing more with less, scaling smarter, not harder, and building big businesses with teams that can fit around a dinner table. I'm your host, Ron Schmelzer, and on today's episode, we're talking to Asia Orangio, who is the founder and CEO of DemandMaven. Hi, Asia. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this is fantastic. I'm looking forward to this because we're digging into some topics we don't usually get into. And maybe by way of introduction here, a real quick intro for Asia, and we'll just get right into it. So Asia is the founder and CEO of DemandMaven, which is a growth consultancy that helps SaaS founders and small teams find product market fit and break through those growth plateaus without needing a full-time marketing department. And she has previously served on the board of directors at Moz. So you might have heard our interview with Rand Fishkin earlier, who was a founder of Moz, now SparkToro. He's doing all sorts of other things that are interesting now, before its successful acquisition. And she's helped companies like Hull achieve 10.5 times growth. So what makes Asia different is her framework-based approach. She's turned what most people treat as ad hoc growth advice into a repeatable system. And we know we love systems because when you're small, things that are repeatable are highly valuable rather than trying to do the same thing over and over again in different ways. That never works out very well. So today we're going to dig into why founders get stuck at that $1 million to $5 million level. And if you're just getting to that $1 million level, then hear about what's going to happen when you get to that $1 to $5 million level, but also some takeaways even for those who are still working their way up there, how to get unstuck. So Asia, thank you so much and welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Nailed it, by the way.
Oh, fantastic. So I guess tell us kind of what got you into this space. How did you get here? And how did you build that expertise in this area?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's not a super common skill set, I find. Usually whenever you talk to anybody who's focused on growth, usually they're either focused exclusively on customer acquisition, or they're exclusively focused on activation, or exclusively on pricing. It's rare to talk to someone who looks and analyzes and can help you with any and all of those things. But it started out actually. So my background was in marketing, is in marketing, I guess, technically still. And I started DemandMaven now 8 years ago. Before DemandMaven, I worked for 2 VC funded startups here in Atlanta, which is where I'm based. And I remember VC funded startups just are they hit different.
Yes,
they are just a very different ball game, extremely different ball game. It's unlike anything in this world. And anytime someone says, oh, we're like a startup, but they're super not a startup, I'm like, you have no idea what it's like actually. But I decided to start my firm because originally I wanted to provide marketing services without being a full-time burden. I say burden, but and that sounds negative, but really more in the I wanted to have a mutually beneficial relationship with other founders and CEOs where they can actually afford the help. And also, if they have to cut marketing or if they have to reduce, I don't lose my job, basically. So the way I kind of saw it was, it'd be really cool if I did marketing services and diversified my portfolio, so to speak, while also still doing the work that I love. And my very first client was awesome. But it was so clear that there's a certain point where it makes sense to scale on the marketing side and where it also doesn't. And this particular company, they were less than $1 million in ARR. They were early, and so this is really common in the bootstrapped world where you can be early stage, but maybe you've been around for 10 years, or maybe you've been around for 5 or 6 years, but maybe you're still less than like $1 million, which is fine. To each their own. Like, grow as fast as you want to. When you're bootstrapped, you can do whatever you want. But what I found was it kind of didn't matter if I scaled top of the funnel, which we did. We were generating trials, we were generating traffic. It from that side of the fence, it was working. But the free trial to paid conversion rate was like 10%. And it kind of didn't matter if I scaled the marketing side. And I remember,
what should it be like when you're thinking a target? So that's not a good place to be, but like what is a place you really want to be at?
Yeah, I know that now. I think at the time I was like banging my head against the wall, like why is my effort like not really paying off? It ideally should be more than 30%. Now, the industry, the stats, the benchmarks for particularly bootstrapped companies. Now, bootstrapped, it's more like 15%, but this isn't necessarily like, oh, you're 15%, you're good. This is more like most bootstrap companies aren't like, they're actually under investing in activation. It really, in order for you to be like mathematically sound on like the unit economics of SaaS, you want to be in that 30 to 40% range. That's true for pretty much any type of business. There are certainly anomalies and exceptions to the rule, but 90% of people listening are going to be in that, like they might be in that 15% mark, but they really should be in the 30 to 40% bracket. So I will say benchmarks are really dangerous because they make you think that you are safe. But what I find is that if you and all of your peers aren't getting at least in that bracket, what's actually happening is you actually have really inefficient growth. And that's activation. I learned over the last 8 years of running DemandMaven, I have learned tons about activation and how to improve that metric. I've learned a lot about pricing and how to think about a percentage of expansion revenue. So if you think about new MRR every single month, there's, of course, like new MRR that you're adding on top. There's expansion revenue, and then there's reactivation revenue. Those are the 3 types of MRR coming back to you or funneling into the business. What I've learned, though, is that really healthy SaaS companies, at least 30% of their incoming MRR is expansion revenue, meaning customers are like, they're on one plan and they upgrade to another plan. If it's less than 30%, you're basically relying almost exclusively on new MRR, meaning new customers coming in, and very little on existing customers expanding. And that creates a really interesting unit economic as well, because basically what that means is all of your growth is really only going to come from new customers, which is infinitely more expensive growth than expanding the ones that you already have. So like you've heard it before, that the best customer to get is the one that you already have, actually. So keeping them and expanding them, like that's like the secret sauce of any SaaS company. There are some products and industries where this is really hard to do, but I would wager 70% of folks out there should be thinking about pricing strategy. So I've learned a lot about that. And then the last most critical metric is going to be net revenue retention. So when you start out in the early days, you hear about monthly churn and like monthly retention. Oh, my monthly churn rate's like, 4%, 3%. Great. The next number after that you should be looking at, and I would argue that this is the most critical KPI. If I know what this number is for any company, I can tell exactly what the growth is like. And that's net revenue retention, specifically at the 12-month mark. Most founders, especially bootstrapped ones, are using Profitwell. And if you're not using Profitwell, you might be using Stripe. And if you're not using Stripe, maybe you're using like Paddle or some of the others. But pretty much every single SaaS metrics or SaaS like subscription analytics platform has this number. You want net revenue retention at 12 months. What is the average? And if it's less than 70%, you're not ready to scale customer acquisition. And also you probably need to be looking at things like activation, pricing, et cetera, because what it means is that you're retaining 70% of the revenue that you achieved 12 months ago. If it's less than 70%, growth is going to feel extremely frustrating. You're throwing everything at the wall. You can't figure out why it's slow, but it's because you're basically slow churning people out long term. And that type of churn you don't see in the first 3 months because you've probably retained them all. Slow churn, sneaky churn, I call it sneaky churn. That churn happens like month 7, month 8, month 9. That type of churn. That's the type of churn that will make any go-to-market motion extremely inefficient and very frustrating. And as a founder, you'll be like, why am I not growing? But it's like, if you look at that 12-month NRR, you're like, oh, it's 60%. That's a company that's struggling, or at least like it's frustrating as heck to try to grow. So you have to dig into more strategic things and not just marketing. So basically, it's my long-winded spiel of saying the last 8 years of me running DemandMaven has actually been me learning and exploring and mastering the other growth levers, because customer acquisition is just one growth lever. It's one out of like 6, and there are 5 others, and all of those things have an impact. I would actually argue a larger impact, which probably sounds counterintuitive because you've been told your whole SaaS journey, it's all about customer acquisition and marketing. But I find that the other 6, the other 5 are far more critical than just the customer acquisition piece alone. It's important. Like, you can't not do marketing, but I actually think like the perspective of the average founder, at least in the earlier days, usually like they're completely focused on product and they're completely focused on marketing, and that's it. There again are a bunch of others that are necessary and are 10 times better than just marketing alone.
Okay. Well, I hope we can get into those other 5 because I'm like really
absolutely.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Well, I think you dropped a lot of great knowledge bombs there. I like to put it, or nuggets. I don't know. I was like talking to someone else. They feel uncomfortable when you use the word nugget for whatever reason. I don't know. I'm thinking gold nuggets. I don't know what they're thinking. Chicken nuggets. But no, this is fantastic. There's a lot of things in there. And I think people might not have already been aware of like to the critical number, this 12-month net revenue retention. That's really important because it's sort of that slow leak. And, when I'm thinking about that, it all comes down to just customers are, they're leaving the product, right? And I would imagine you said there's many reasons for it. And maybe let's get into some of those. And I imagine they connect to those additional levers here. And I think that the biggest thing here that I'm thinking about is that, especially these days, it's so easy now to create new things. And I think that's both an opportunity for new companies to create new things, but I think it's also a bit of a threat, because if it's so easy to create new things, then your competition can create new things, or your customers can decide that they're going to just create something on their own. So I don't know if this is making the problem better or worse in terms of retention. So there's a lot of things going on right now, and I'd love to sort of get your insights and sort of the causes for that and these other levers we can pull.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. NRR, traditionally speaking, is a complex number. There are many different inputs. It's everything from who you're targeting to how the product is positioned to them, to your product strategy. The ultimate value mechanism in SaaS is product. It's software as a service. So literally it's in the name. And it also comes down to pricing has a big impact here as well. All of those things culminate into if someone decides to stay long-term or if they decide to go. Now, what you should be aspiring towards is at least 100% net revenue retention in 12 months. Like, that's like a company that is growing and it feels really nice. And it probably doesn't feel like you're pushing a boulder up a mountain. It feels like you're guiding a boulder down a mountain and you're just making sure it doesn't fall off. Like 100% net revenue retention in 12 months. What that tells me is that company has a lot of things dialed in. They have a very clear understanding of their ICP, who's the actual ideal target buyer and customer, who's most likely to stay and expand and get value. You probably have a pretty decent pricing strategy, meaning people actually do come into the product, choose a plan, and then they more likely are to upgrade. I mentioned percentage of expansion revenue. Companies with 100% or more NRR tend to have higher expansion revenue percentages. Like, it's at least 30%. It could be higher. It could be like 40%. There's some companies I know of that have like 50% of their MRR is going to be from expansion, which is crazy. That company also has pretty high net revenue retention. And then the other things that it really plays into is how good are you at product management, which probably sounds odd, but it really, the more dialed into your customer, their needs, what your product value is, your opportunity in the market, all of those come down into and culminate into product strategy and your ability to deliver value through product, which again is your primary value mechanism because you're SaaS. And then of course, there are certainly other key players like activation. And one of the things about NRR that's really interesting is, while there are many different inputs, if you don't have great NRR, it's actually pretty easy to troubleshoot. Like, it's actually pretty easy to isolate it and really get to the root cause of what's causing the NRR, when you unpack that number and when you really look at, oh man, okay, like who is our ICP? What does our activation look like? Are we actually churning out like, maybe not best fit customers, or are we losing people who we should be keeping? What is our product process? Who actually defines product strategy for us? Like when you actually look at all those things, usually there are like 2 to 3 very obvious, like, oh, this kind of sucks, or like, oh, pricing kind of sucks. So for example, the telltale sign that pricing maybe isn't as optimized is if you find like 80% of customers are on your plan and it takes like 1 to 2 years for them to upgrade. This is really common. That's like one of the dead giveaways. Like, oh, the majority of people are on one single plan and they never upgrade unless like something dramatic changes in their business. And usually most founders have an intuition here of like, they know something's wrong about it, but it's like, it's too hard to kind of think about. Like we don't have a process for that yet, so we don't know how to fix it. And that's usually what blocks most founders. They just don't know what the process is. And if they knew what the process was, and if they felt like confident in that process, they can, deploy the changes and fixes. But we'll bookmark that because I feel like we might get into it. I don't know.
No, I'm actually thinking about it. I mean, because I'm thinking that the problem you would think is, but it could be a bunch of different things. It could be, did they underprice the product? Was there a feature mismatch between the product, the pricing at different tiers? I can imagine there's probably a lot of reasons why someone may be really happy to stay in whatever plan that they're in and not willing to upgrade. Maybe it's not as simple as it seems. I don't know.
I find 9 times out of 10, it's the value metric. They usually just don't have the most dialed in value metric where as the customer scales in some capacity, the pricing plans also scale. When those two are in alignment, the customer is happy to expand and upgrade, and it doesn't feel like a big friction moment or even like a thing that they would have to really think about. What I find is usually when you see scenarios where pricing isn't super optimized, it's not the right value metric. And in order for them to upgrade, something fundamental about their business would have to change that isn't natural to them. So the most common thing I see, for example, is there's usually some element around, especially in B2B world, around team or like number of users or number of members. But that value metric isn't true or ideal for a lot of industries. And particularly like your ICP, that might not be super ideal because if your customer isn't growing super fast, then like they're not going to upgrade ever. There's a company that we just worked with where their value metric was primarily based on team members. But this was based off of a business and an industry where the buyer, like the customer literally never added team members. They might have like part-time assistants or like a little bit of like, cleaners or like people who are like micro services, but they would never be considered like a team member who would need access to this platform. And so the way that those companies scale and grow was far more on like the number of clients they had. So they actually changed the value metric from like team member based or like user based to, well, how many clients are you working with? And now as the customer grows, they naturally upgrade plans, and it feels natural and like beneficial for them to do that. There's all types of work that you can do to figure out like what that should be. But that's what I find is like most common. That's another telltale sign for me is like whenever I'm coming into a company and I'm helping them overcome a growth plateau. And if pricing is something that kind of seems like it needs help, my first question is this the right value metric for the actual ICP, ideal customer profile? And there's all kinds of things that we do to kind of get into like, how do we know? But that's just within, the pricing sphere. There are other spheres that we also have to look at, but that's, just my quick and dirty answer of like, it's usually this, but it could be other things, but.
Do you see anything changing in the way that pricing is done now that feels like we're moving towards more of a consumption-based, a token-based, a usage-based model where maybe the entry point is kind of like low, but you're paying for it, especially with all the AI tools. It looks like everything is like, well, it's all token-based. Does that change any of that formula much at all?
I wish I could say there was a one size fits all. I find this is so heavily dependent on the market. There are just so many different niche markets out there. And there are, I would say like there are 6 to 7 ways to structure pricing. They are all so heavily industry and market based. Like there's a la carte, like approaches. There's like good, better, best, which is, like your 3 to 4 plans with features in them. There's, sliding scale models. Here's a one plan and you add on all of your add-ons. I mean, there are a million different ways to kind of slice and dice how pricing should be structured. I wish I could say there was like here's what's popular or common. I think with AI kind of getting introduced to the mix, what we're seeing more common than not, or more often than not, is there are base level plans. It's like basically like your pricing with like credits or tokens. Right, exactly. And like they're basically just introducing that as like another way, which I think is smart, because if you're not sure if your market actually cares about AI or AI usage, it's a really easy way to kind of tack it on without having to overhaul all of your pricing. So I would say like that's becoming a lot more common that we're seeing, but TBD on if that's optimized or not, or if it's going to make sense for you and like your market. I find it's so that is pretty common, but it really is like your mileage may vary.
So now, did we cover all the 5 additional levers? I think we did, right? Or did we get into? I wasn't counting when we went over it.
No, we kind of just like dove right into pricing. So if I were to give like high level, what are the growth levers? The easiest way to remember them is to think about pirate metrics. So if you remember like pirate metrics, it's like acquisition, awareness, activation, that type of thing. Yeah, exactly. So what most people are familiar with is going to be customer acquisition. That's your marketing, that's your sales, that's if you're running ads, like what channels you're using, like that type of thing. Customer acquisition. This is it's definitely the most popular. It is the least efficient. I'm here to tell you right now, like least efficient. Like literally any other lever will give you 2 to 3x, sometimes even 10x, like the return. But this is why. Don't get me wrong, I'm a huge believer in customer acquisition. You have to do it. It's not like a thing you can skip. But what I think is important is that when you do invest in it, that you're actually ready, that the rest of your funnel is relatively ready. When you're less than $1 million, you really, there's a lot of pressure, I think, to overinvest in marketing at this stage. But I find you'd be shocked at how much you don't actually need it as much as you maybe do the others. So that's the most common. The next right after that is going to be activation. So this is where you get into when users sign up for your product or even book a demo, become a customer and actually start using it. This is like your onboarding process, but it's also how you think about measuring when new users have achieved their value moment. The other way to think about activation is free trial to paid, or free account to paid if you're freemium, or even your sales close rates. So activation has a number of different branches. Those are the different branches. And if you're product-led growth, PLG, self-service, you're going to have definitions for several of those. If you're more sales-led and like you don't have like a trial or like a self-service motion, you're going to think about activation more about like when you onboard. So after you close that deal and they actually, they sign the agreement, you kick off. Did they actually achieve value in 3 months or a quarter or whatever it is? And then after that, we get into pricing and monetization. So this is like the revenue part of the R, pirate metrics. Pricing and monetization. If you remember Patrick Campbell from ProfitWell and Price Intelligently, Patrick has done tons of talks about how pricing is one of the most impactful and effective levers. Sounds really obvious, but if you increase your prices, boom, you're probably going to make more money, like instantly. You might have some drop off. And what's really cool about pricing is it's, of course, all about perceived value. And what's really interesting is there are different ways, of course, like different knobs. There are a lot of different knobs to turn in pricing and monetization to really dial it in. So that way you can appeal to like your core target markets and it feels good for them to pay what they're being asked to pay. Like that's what I kind of like about pricing. I think it's really cool. And then we get into some of the other like lesser known levers. These are not necessarily part of pirate metrics, but this is just based off of what I've seen in my experience. There's product. So product strategy, your product process, how you think about product management, all the way down into like, do you do UX interviews? Do you do assumption testing? Do you do opportunity mapping? Like there's so many things inside of product management that ultimately culminates in how you deliver value. And what's fascinating is sometimes poor NRR happens because we're actually like, we need to upgrade our level of product management. The way we were doing it is not working. We need to now like upgrade how we're doing this. Some founders are terrified by that. Some founders are like, yes, give me more. Would love to learn all the things. It just depends, how open someone is to something like that. Then we get into operations and process. This is really surprising for a lot of people because a lot of people don't like to think that how they're operating is actually what's holding them back. But what we find, and just in my work that I've done over the last 8 years, working with over 100 SaaS companies, is sometimes the way that you goal set, the way that you structure your team, the way that you set targets, and the way that you talk about those targets with your team, all of that can be positive or it can be harmful. Like it can actually hold you back. There was a company I worked with once where we discovered that they didn't set any revenue targets. And what they were doing was what they would do is they would say, okay, we have a quarter. What do we think we can accomplish in a quarter? That's very different than in 12 months, I want to hit this revenue goal. Now let's backtrack every quarter over quarter. What's my current quarter's milestone? How do I get there? That's a very different mindset than, well, I don't really know where we're going, but I also don't really know like, well, what can we accomplish in a quarter? It's very different. So of course they're saying, hey, we're having growth challenges. Like we can't figure out what's going on. And I attend like 3 of their marketing meetings and one of their like executive or founder level meetings where like the founders get together and they kind of talk through like, you know, their goals. And it was really obvious that they actually didn't have like any like revenue goals. It was like, how do you expect your growth and marketing team to achieve a goal that you haven't set? So it was just, you know, like that sounds really obvious, but you'd be surprised at how common and how understandable, because I want to make it clear, like there's no shame here, but this kind of thing can happen. And so even how you run your meeting with your team can impact how you think about growth. If you don't have a very strong data-driven or insights-driven muscle in your organization, you will fall prey to a lot of myths, to a lot of, you know, fantasies and silver bullets about what growth looks like, particularly in companies where if you don't know what that looks like, then you don't actually know like what the hard work actually does, like, and what it should feel like and what it should look like. So you don't know how to operationalize around it. And then the last one I'll share is team. Who do you have on deck to help you accomplish any of these things that you want to accomplish? Once you hit that 1 million mark, you are probably thinking a lot more about team. Even before you hit 1 million, you're probably thinking a little bit about team. It's hard to get to 1 million by yourself. Like I'm assuming you have engineers. You might have a marketing team, a small one at least. You might have a product and engineering team that's a little more scaled out. You also probably have some support folks on deck. But once you hit that 1 million mark, things do tend to change related to how you think about who's in what seat. And also too, like, depending on how ambitious you are. If you want to get to 5 million, 10 million, 25 million, there are different team structures that are going to enable that a bit better than if you were to try to do it on your own. So a lot of times I'll work with CEOs and founders who are very frustrated with their slow growth, but they have super junior folks in all the seats. They have really super junior marketing people and they're expecting them to be CMOs with all of this rich SaaS experience, but like they're not, you know, you hired them out of college. They've maybe had like one job and it was like doing marketing for a law firm. Totally not related at all to what you're doing now, which is, you know, SaaS, whatever, software. And then on the flip side, I've also seen founders and CEOs do this as well. But sometimes they'll hire very junior engineers, expecting them to become CTOs or expecting them to be like VPs of engineering. But actually, like, if you're the founder and if you're the CEO, you're actually all of those things. You're the CMO, you're the CTO, you're the CFO, right. You're literally everything, right? So I see this happen a lot where companies want to scale, they want to grow. They're like, like, why are we stuck at 1 million or why are we stuck at 5 million? But actually, when you look at how their team is structured, they don't actually have the right people in the right seats to do that work. And I'm never someone who says like, oh, you got to fire that person, you got to let that person go. I'm more someone who says, here's who you need to add. And then you can decide, you know, from there, like how you want to, like who you want to keep on board. Because I know obviously like those relationships are important to a lot of founders. Yeah. But my job is usually like, here's how we would restructure and here's who you would hire. Yeah, it's an interesting conversation. Now, of course, the conversations we've been having have been a slightly different nature because there's a lot of folks who are growing without hiring. And so there's a different team dynamic. You have to ask yourself, am I even the right person? I'm a one-person company. Am I the right person? The answer might be no, surprisingly. But then the question is, well, then how do you grow while keeping the team lean? That's a whole other conversation. We've had many of those conversations on the podcast. But there are many stories now of small teams growing very large with
without actually growing their team. The Dato CMS is a great SaaS company we interviewed here many episodes ago. It's just 13 people. They're doing $6.5 million ARR. And they're like, we like it like this. We like it like this.
Yeah.
And their growth is like this. So I encourage our listeners there. But let's actually get into the stuck part, because that's the part I'm very interested in here. That was our lead in here to this podcast, which is that you hinted at it a little bit here when we were talking about the team size. You're hitting 1 million. That's already starting to reach one aspect of this plateau. So what is this? It sounds like it's much more common than people might expect, that you get to this level of success, but then you can't break through it. So what is this growth plateau? Why is it happening? What's sort of getting in the way? Is it a process issue? Well, I shouldn't lead into it. Maybe you can help us figure out kind of what is it and how do we break through that level? Yeah.
There are three levels, I'll say, where it's most likely you're going to get stuck, but it's very common. And there are definitely ways or things that I look for, at least at each of these stages. So the first is going to be you get stuck at 1 million and you can't figure out like why. And stuck, I want to qualify stuck a little bit too, because stuck can mean grow, like maybe you're growing, but it's like just monstrously slow. Like it's like 1% growth month over month or something, or maybe even less in some cases. There also is just truly like you're flatlining in that the new MRR that you're adding, you're churning pretty much the same exact amount. And maybe there's very little expansion revenue and very little like reactivation revenue. And in those scenarios, there are a couple of things that we look at. So first, the 1 million mark it's very common to get stuck there. It's also really common to get stuck at 3 to 5 million in ARR. And then the next most common place to get stuck is 10 million in ARR. And we look at different things. I mean, we really look at everything at every stage, but we do look at slightly different things based on 1 million versus 3 to 5 million. When you're at 1 million and you're stuck, what I find is most common is it's usually a combination of we don't have customer acquisition super dialed in. So we do need to look at marketing. We need to look at sales. We need to look at whatever your go-to-market motion is. We got to look at your marketing site. We got to look at your positioning and your messaging. There's something about go-to-market strategy and also usually marketing specifically that's misaligned. And this is the first area of opportunity. So again, stuck at 1 million usually is because like there's something maybe amiss around acquisition. The second thing that we look at is activation. So are we, like, of the people that we're actually attracting, are we efficiently converting them? And then the last thing we look at is net revenue retention. And I would actually, depending on the company, we might flip that. We might look at NRR first, because like based on, what the founder tells us. NRR is a pretty fast number to pull. If you have profit well, you already have this number. But that tells us pretty instantly, like, is this deeper? Like, is it deeper than the more surface level things like customer acquisition and activation? Or is it actually, this is healthy, but we're just not adding enough new MRR to the equation? NRR is interesting though, because again, it can tell us a lot of things. It can tell us, it definitely gives me a clear sense of like, oh, okay, like this company is primed for growth and we just need to like put some fuel on the fire and really dial in go-to-market and dial in marketing. Or it tells me, there's something more happening here. It could be pricing. It could be product. It could be also, it could be customer acquisition, but maybe more by way of we're trying to attract the wrong people. And that's kind of what prompts us to dig further. But I will say those are the most common things I see at 1 million is it's usually some combination of it's customer acquisition, it's activation, it's pricing, or sometimes it is something much deeper and we've got to do more like root cause analysis to kind of figure out like what's actually happening.
Yeah. Well, this might even tie a bit into our sort of next conversation area, which is around product market fit, because it's possible, because I've seen, you and I have seen a lot of early stage companies and founders, and sometimes it looks like, the founders do all these like heroics, is I guess the best way to put it, to get those first customers. They'll do like almost anything to get those first customers. Maybe the first ones aren't even paying much, or they're, throwing tons of service at the first few customers because the product may not be there yet. I mean, there's lots of reasons. There's nothing wrong with it. But maybe how you got to your first million, most likely probably not be the way you get to your next batch, unless you've figured it out, and things are just, growing well. So how does maybe perhaps that plateau maybe even relate to this idea of product market fit. And maybe there's some red flags that people should be aware of where it's like, yeah, you're making money, but maybe this is not sustainable, or maybe they're doing you a favor or something. I don't really know, whatever it takes to get to that first million.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a part of the product market fit story. And what's interesting about product market fit is a lot of people think like, oh, I've achieved it, I'm done. But actually, like you're continuously achieving product market fit, especially as you grow. And the more you grow, the more you contend with that in different market segments. But yes, it's absolutely part of the product market fit story. At a million, and there are definitely signs that indicate like, okay, yes, like there's pretty solid product market fit. But what would tell me that maybe we didn't have good product market fit? NRR is certainly a part of that story, but there's also different analyses that we can do. NPS scores are another leading indicator that maybe product market fit is misaligned. What makes it most interesting to me though is when you segment or cohort your NRR. So there's like the number that you look at in aggregate, but if you were to segment by maybe type of plan or maybe type of buyer or maybe even like time frame of when they came to you as a customer, you might find that actually this very specific segment has incredible net revenue retention. Everything else is sandbagging it basically and making it like not look great. That's happened before with some clients I've worked with where if you look at the NRR number as a whole, you're like, it's not super great. And that might make you think, oh, we're not ready for certain things. But if you cohort it, when we cohorted it, we looked at 3 different, we'll call them like personas or ideal customer profiles. We found like there was one that was like amazing. It was like 110% at 12 months, but the volume was real small. And so then we were like, well, why is the volume so small? Turns out customer acquisition wasn't super dialed in. And then also product strategy wasn't super dialed in. Like we weren't really doing the best things to acquire those people. And we weren't investing on the product side to help retain those people. And it was just really obvious and clear that like, oh, these people, like they pay more, they stay longer. These are great. We need more of them. And the absolute worst segment was the most popular one. And that was the one that go-to-market was aligned around, even though that wasn't necessarily what the founder believed in or like wanted to do anyway. And like pretty much like the rest of the company was like, yeah, no, like we love those people, but like they're not really where the future is for us. And so it was like, oh, well, this is a really, I'm not going to say easy, but like, oh, we got to realign go-to-market then. Like that's a pretty obvious next step. So anyway, that's an example of where you can kind of get into like the specifics of you actually can quantify product market fit to a degree.
It's interesting, a lot of this really comes down to metrics and data and science, which is great. But then a lot of the tough problems come down to psychology, it sounds like.
Yes.
So like, this is, how much of this is sort of like numbers and how much of this is really psychology?
Yeah. So in any project that we do, we are always balancing 2 things. There's the qualitative, which is talking to the team, talking to the founders, talking to customers, talking to audience members, prospects, competitors, like former employees of competitors will actually tell you like, don't do this, do this. So qualitative is a huge portion of what we use to really understand what it is that we're seeing. And then of course there's quantitative. That's all the metrics, the data, the analytics. There's even like, depending on how large the company is, like if you have a lot of customer data, for example, there's an element of, like business intelligence that we might have to like crunch some really specific numbers and work really closely with the team on getting to a certain level of fidelity that, we feel good about. It really is both. And what I think I would hesitate to say like it's one more than the other. You do need both. If you're pulling a bunch of numbers and you're not adding the qualitative layer, meaning talking to customers or prospects, whatever that number is related to, you're missing a huge part of the pie. Like you're missing a huge part of because like the number can't tell you why something is happening or even who. The number is just the number and that's that. But like part of our process is adding qualitative insight to give context to that number. So for example, the NRR thing that I mentioned earlier, we wouldn't have thought to do that if we hadn't have run jobs to be done interviews and talking to a number of different types of customers, not just one, homogenous set, but like this is a heterogeneous set. This is many different types of people. And what we noticed was there was definitely like, okay, here's like the customer that seems to be pretty common. But then there were 2 or 3 other personas that we were like, that's interesting. They like the product. I wonder what NRR would be like if we just had those people. And that's what kind of prompted that query. But that's why you need qualitative. Don't just look at the number. You kind of need to hear from real people, because that product is the primary value mechanism. People are the customer. So,
Right.
like you need like the people who are consuming the product for value, got to talk to those people. Sounds so obvious, but like, and I know, talking to people is scary, but like, but I find when you do it with a partner, like it makes it much less scary. You get a lot more like, okay, like I know what this should look like.
Well, this is great. And I could spend hours talking and being mindful of the time here. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize
We have time.
how far along we are. But before I get into the rapid fires here, like even your organization's pretty small too, right? So you're just like a few people and you're managing to scale. So are you applying a lot of these same, even though you're not in the B2B SaaS or just the SaaS space, you're in the service business? I mean, I would imagine a lot of these are applicable across the range. Doesn't really matter what kind of product you're selling.
Yeah. You might be shocked. We are exclusively focused on SaaS. Certainly software. So I include software into that category, even though, you might not charge monthly. But we are pretty exclusively focused on software and SaaS. We do work outside of, the industry and other industries. Like, it's rare, but sometimes we get into finance. Sometimes we get into retail, or even like, like mom and pop shops might hire us to conduct research about something very specific. But usually, my favorite project is when we get to work with a software company that is either, again, struggling with growth, or they are going to market and they're like, how do I do this and not, waste a bunch of money on an agency running ads? Like, that's like, those are the top two projects that we get. And usually it's more, we're experiencing a plateau help. But the go-to-market projects are really fun too. We've also done, customer discovery and product discovery work for like really early stage pre-product folks, pre-MVP. That's a lot of fun as well. But yeah, I would say my passion has been SaaS for the last 10, 11, 12 years now. And the more I learn about it and the more it changes, the more I'm like, oh my gosh, like there's still so much more. Like I'm getting pretty deep right now into product strategy and like assumption testing and prototyping. And then UX research has always been a core part of what we do, depending on the problem that we're trying to solve. But it's just really cool seeing how other people do like UX interviews. And yeah,
what do you think about all the people talking about the end of SaaS? You don't see that at all.
I don't. I think if anything, it's going to explode even more. I think everyone's going to be a SaaS owner, especially with AI, like with Lovable and Claude, and Cowork, and all the things that it can, Claude Code, like anyone can become a SaaS founder now. I actually think it's going to do the opposite. I think we're already seeing the bajillion AI tools. I think at some point people will start to like regular everyday people will kind of realize like, oh, I can actually build an app like tomorrow if I really wanted to.
Exactly.
So I think we're actually going to see an influx of a lot of baby founders and a lot of founders who really go the indie funded route. I don't think I think the VC funds I think will always be there, but I just think we're going to see so many more like if you were to compare it to like, mom and pop shop type world where like there are the big retail businesses, but now there's a bunch of like the mom and pop shops. I think the same thing is happening to SaaS. There are the big SaaS companies that go after big dollars, but now there are a bajillion million like small SaaS, niche SaaS that really prioritizes providing immense value for a very affordable cost. And I think the models will change over time, but I think the way that we think about product and idea development, it's completely changed. Like the top has been blown off completely.
That's cool. Well, I like that perspective. Well, as mentioned, we have a couple of rapid fire questions here, and I'll have you back on a future podcast if you're open to it. This is for or share with our Scalabrate members in a work group. I think this would be fantastic if you're up for it.
Sure.
Fantastic. Well, okay, so our first rapid fire question is tools. We always like to ask it. We ask it to everybody. We always get a different answer. So like, what is one tool, AI or automation or anything that you absolutely can't run your business without? The one that gives you and your team the 10x leverage every single week.
I'm going to be so lame and say Claude.
The common answer, nothing wrong with that.
I would say particularly for me because I am a knowledge worker and a consultant, and 90% of my job is to evangelize the ideas, my learnings, my findings, and make that as accessible as possible to the masses. And I could not create at the scale or capacity that I do while also still consulting without Claude. In fact, I'm kind of like, I don't know how I survived without it. Writing, I can write. Writing hasn't always been my passion in life. And Claude has nailed my voice in a way that I'm like, this is scary. I still have to make edits, but it's just made it so much easier for me to produce and to educate and provide resources. Like that's my whole world.
It's wild how something that wasn't part of our life is now part of our everyday life. That's just how it is.
Totally.
So the next rapid fire is process. So like what's one system or process that you think every lean leverage first team should have in place by the time they hit that first $1 million? The one that separates the scalers from the grinders, the ones who work really hard to get that first million and have to work twice as hard to get that second million. So what do you think they should stop doing, or what do you think they should start doing today?
Yeah. The process I'm going to describe is going to be one that is more, it's going to sound abstract, but it's actually highly applicable. The muscle that you need to build by the time you get to 1 million and beyond is going to be how you troubleshoot and solve complex problems. Not the like, I want 10 tips and tricks for how to run marketing campaigns, not the highly tactical stuff. I'm talking about like the juicy, meaty, hard challenges and problems. Like, how do you fix bad pricing? How do you fix bad activation? How do you fix poor customer acquisition? And not in the tactical sense, but in the strategic sense. What's your approach? What data do you use? What's the playbook that you run every time you come across like a hairy, sticky problem? Because the answer for a lot of people is to bury their head in the sand, wait until it becomes so bad that they have to do something, or worse, their business dies. And I think like if you can build the muscle of how you solve sticky, hard problems and how you learn how others do it, I think you're going to do infinitely better than people who never think about that type of thing. A lot of founders and CEOs, they operationalize around solving the tactical thing that's right in front of them and never like the big picture. I think you got to get comfortable in the big picture sometimes. I know that's like, not everyone's comfort zone, but if you can do that, you're going to be light years ahead of most other people.
That's fantastic.
And it's going to feel better your journey will feel better for it too.
Yeah, I think it's something people need to develop. Get past the shallow and get into the deep end. So that's where all the good stuff is. So I guess the last lightning or rapid fire question is a tip. So if you can give one piece of advice to a founder who's running that dinner table size team right now, who wants to scale, maybe what's one additional thing you share? You've already shared a lot here, but maybe an additional little insight you'd share.
I think it's really important to take a look at who's actually at the table. And not like in a mean or critical way, but more in like who do I need to add to my table? Or how can I adjust how we're currently, like for everyone who is at the table, how can I adjust how we're currently operating to get where we want to go? Because what got you here is not going to get you there. I've seen founders try to do that a million bajillion times. The quick story I'll tell is there's a founder I know who they're at like 4 million. They're stuck at 4 million ARR. They have no full-time employees, but they have 30 to 40 contractor direct reports. There's no internal hierarchy at all. It's completely flat organization. The founder is literally in one-to-ones every single day, all day long.
Wow.
And there's no time to do any real work. There's no time to actually think about how we're going to get where we want to go. And on top of that, these contractors are all siloed. So no one owns anything. They don't talk to each other, completely flat. So this founder is literally running around like a chicken with their head cut off, like all the time. So there's no time to actually think strategically. There's no time to actually think about how we're going to do the thing. Never forget that the way that you're structured and who's actually at your table has a huge impact on how you're going to get where you want to go. And if you even get there in the first place. So that's a story of, I would say, they're part of why they're stalled is because of how they're structured. But I would take a look at who's at the table, who do you need to add, or how do you restructure what you're currently doing? Maybe you don't want to add people, that's fine. But how can you restructure or reorganize how you're doing what you're doing to accomplish your goals?
Wow. Fantastic. This is great. This is deep insights. Wish I had more time. We will definitely spend more time. Yeah, we will for sure. So thank you, Asia. You were fantastic. This is amazing. Really unique insights. I don't think we ever had this on our podcast. We usually talk to operators or thinking about their product and, how they're scaling. But this is sort of that other perspective of like, what's keeping you from scaling. So I really love this perspective. So thank you so much for joining us.
Likewise. Thanks again for having me.
So I'm going to give you that mantra for the week as we do in all of our podcasts. If you're trying to break through, this is the one for this week. So if you're trying to break through, find all the levers that are constraining your growth, and hint, it may not be the one that you always like to pull. So look at the other ones and try to pull the ones that really make sense. So if you've loved this interview with Asia, I want you to hit that subscribe button. I want you to leave a review and share it with that founder friend who's still struggling with growth and hitting that plateau. I want you to think big, stay lean, and scale smarter.
Small teams that scale big aren't the future, they're the now. If this episode has you inspired to learn more, hit that subscribe button, share it with your crew, and join the movement over at scalebrate.com. That's SCALEBRATE.com. Until next time, think big, stay lean, and scale smarter, because small teams have mega potential. And thanks for tuning in to the Small Team, Big Scale podcast.